items on our public hearing agenda, but I need a request to continue the item A, a public hearing to consider permanently closing an unnamed alley off Broad Street to January 13th, 2015.
So moved.
Second. Anyone wishing to make comment on the continuation of item A under public hearings? All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, and then the second item was withdrawn, so it doesn't require any action. We're moving on to unfinished business, consideration of naming rights for the corner of the Asheville Art Museum's programmable area in front of the new Asheville Art Museum on the corner of Billmore Avenue and Patton Avenue to be named State Place Credit Union Plaza, or C2. And I realize there are a lot of people here, more people, who would like to comment on this topic. And just in terms of organizing this section, I know that Janice Ashley, Assistant City Attorney, is there and is going to make a presentation. And I know Councilman Hunt is going to add to that presentation. And I'm wondering if we want to organize this so that we have 30 minutes dedicated to the pro and 30 minutes dedicated to the con, so we get a little balance in terms of the presentations. That would be my suggestion. Does anyone have any objection to that process or prefer a different process? Okay.
And Mayor, it might be helpful for council to have some clarifying questions prior to the public hearings.
Yes,
They answer
sure.
certain questions.
Yeah, and the 30 and 30 would be outside that process, yes.
And perhaps include the admonition that when public comment starts, you don't need to keep repeating the same information over and over and over again when you hear it. So, just, I think out of fairness to your fellow citizens, we don't need to keep hearing the same things again and again and again. It isn't necessarily helpful.
And that's a good reminder that when you do provide comment, you'll get 3 minutes, but if you have 3 people to yield their time, you can have 10 minutes. So you can, if you want to get organized amongst yourselves to do that too, that's obviously an option. Okay, take it away.
Okay, good evening, Mayor, council members. I'm Janice Ashley, Assistant City Attorney, and I've been working to finalize the leases between the Asheville Art Museum and the Diana Wortham Theater for the Pathway Center spaces for the past couple of months, and I'm very pleased to be able to report to you tonight that both those leases have been signed. We have final leases. The matter before you this evening is a request by the Art Museum to consideration of approval of naming rights agreement between the Art Museum and the State Employees, North Carolina State Employees Credit Union Foundation for the naming of a portion of the plaza in front of the entrance to the Art Museum. And you can see a rendering here. The naming rights would benefit the Art Museum's capital campaign for the major renovation of the museum. Throughout the lease negotiations, the Art Museum's always made clear that they're going to do a multi-million-dollar renovation to this building, and that they would need to raise capital campaign funds to do this. And so the city, as part of the lease, agreed to allow the Art Museum to enter into naming rights to benefit the Art Museum and raise funds. And any of those naming rights in this, what's called a programmable area, the plaza area in front of the Art Museum, are subject to City Council approval. So the Art Museum has submitted to you a formal request for this naming rights agreement between themselves and the State Employees Credit Union. And representatives of the Art Museum are here tonight to give you more specifics. But just generally, it does involve a $1.5 million donation that would go to the Art Museum. The donation is tied to the museum's ability to achieve a certain level of capital campaign fundraising and to begin the renovation. Any approvals of the signage package would be subject to all the usual sign ordinance provisions and any other additional requirements that City Council would choose to require, any other approvals you require. The term of the naming rights agreement would run with the term of the Art Museum lease. Those are really the basic terms, and I know that Art Museum representatives are here. If you wanted more details at this point, or maybe you have more questions for me about the process, the lease process.
Does anyone have any questions for Janice? I know Mark wanted to add a piece of this. Okay, Mark, what make you?
Well, my intent is to offer a motion for approval with a couple of conditions, and I'll get to that in a second. I want to comment sort of on the backdrop and the question we're faced with tonight. First of all, Janice indicated we have signed leases with these organizations. Funding for the Art Museum improvements to what is a city building are going well. There was a reapproval, a reaffirmation of approval of funds from the TDA maybe a month ago, after a very rigorous review by TDA that reaffirms the good track that project is on. As well, down at Worthing Theater has got a great trajectory for the use of the lower level of Pack Place and to convert it really to a performing arts center from a simple theater. And that's very exciting. I know the supporters there. Colburn is in there for another year, and we'll be moving on from there. And I'll remind the community, Colburn needs our support as they move forward. They have great strategic opportunity as well. So I think things are on a great trajectory at Pack Place. State Employees Credit Union, in good faith, is engaged in this community effort to improve a public building. They have generously stepped up and committed $1.5 million to improve a city-owned building. That funding comes from contributions that the members, the depositors in the credit union make, and that many depositors do it electively out of the goodness of their heart to support the community engagement that the State Employees Credit Union offers. SECU is effectively a nonprofit and a great partner to the whole state and many communities in the state. And I think it's important it's important to me in terms of how the city government, the city council responds to this situation to honor the commitment that SECU is making. That SECU doesn't throw this money around very readily. It was a very careful process, a competitive process that they awarded. And I think we owe gratitude to SECU. And I heard that maybe a SECU board member was going to perhaps be here tonight. Is that? Okay, well, I was hoping that Dr. Olson Huff might be able to make it here because I think thanking him directly and asking him to relay that back would be important. But it is true that we've got very imperfect circumstances in this case. The lease agreement with the Asheville Art Museum does, in its words, contemplate naming rights outside the building. It also requires that city approval is required to grant those naming rights. The order was a bit reversed here. We know that the Art Museum entered a contract with SECU for this grant money and promised naming rights. Is that a good thing? No. There's been a lot of serious talk between individual council members and city staff with leadership of the Art Museum, and they know that this is distressing to us, and I can assure you it's been a serious discussion. It's not an acceptable way to go forward in the future. But again, our question tonight is whether or not to move forward. And so, and it's not a simple decision. There are mixed trade-offs. In the questions I asked myself, first of all, has the process been good today? No. Has the public been engaged? Have stakeholder groups been engaged as thoroughly as they should have been? The answer is no. Is the final product that we see here consistent with what else goes on in naming rights across Pack Square Park? Yes. This is not out of character with the kinds of fundraising initiatives that we've conducted for this town square and its surrounds. Would we ultimately, if we had a proper process, if we had fully engaged and this exact naming rights implementation? Perhaps not. Would we have done something like it? Probably. Very probably, yes. I do not have a problem with naming rights like this. I'm very regretful that the process has been different. So, as I said, I'm going to make a motion to go ahead and approve this tonight. The downside of stopping now and backing up and trying to recreate a process that is a lost opportunity is not something I'm in favor of. I think to delay this decision tonight, to wait a few weeks while we try to go through some motions would result in a very tortured process. It would not be good for this community. I don't think it would be good for this project. I certainly don't think it would be good for funding partnerships that we need to rely on to get things done, to get capital projects done here. And our community happens to be pretty good at making it difficult to get things done this way. So I think that this is a time for our community and our city council to come together and, even though it's imperfect, move forward with what is essentially a good funding partnership and a good project. So, with having said all that, I have this motion to offer. I move to grant approval of the naming rights agreement between Asheville Art Museum and the North Carolina State Employees Credit Union Foundation and the naming of a portion of the plaza at Pack Square as SECU Plaza as requested, but with the following conditions, and these are beyond what were included in the packet that went out on the internet before today. In addition to being subject to all signage requirements provided by the UDO, all aspects of the naming rights signage, including placement, design, aesthetic qualities, shall be subject to final review and approval by the city manager, and that the duration of the naming rights will be limited to the duration of the Asheville Art Museum lease, and any agreement between AAM and SECU shall clearly reflect this fact. So with that, Mayor, I will entertain a second.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second.
I guess I have a question statement.
Yes.
Again, share a lot of gratitude for SECU and its support for the Art Museum. I think it's great. I mean, it's wonderful, and their program of how they raise money is good, and I really thank them for their investment and their interest in the Art Museum. And from the Art Museum's perspective, based on the lease, I think they had a reasonable expectation that we were going to grant them the ability for naming rights. I, for one, was not aware that that was part of the lease, and I'm a little frustrated by that, but nonetheless, I don't feel comfortable at this point pulling the ability for the Art Museum to get those naming rights. That feels like bait and switch to me. But what I'm really uncomfortable with is the fact of the communication and the lack of communication and the lack of the timeliness. To put council in a position where we're, at least I feel, a little backed into a corner because the city and the Art Museum didn't communicate, either didn't communicate or didn't communicate on a timely basis is really frustrating to me. And I think I speak on behalf of the rest of council to say that I think we're all pretty frustrated with that. And so I'm hoping that in the future, not only the Art Museum, but the other tenant at the Pack Place will commit to communicate better and on a more timely basis with us.
It's like a question.
Yeah, I'll make a comment too. I agree exactly. I feel it's weird to be backed into this kind of situation. On the other hand, there could be a real good argument made that we should have had the Art Museum negotiators negotiate with Cellular because they got a whole building for a whole lot less money than Sekou is going to pay for a plaza. I mean, it's way different. It's way different. This is substantial, and I don't think that the percentage contribution to the Civic Center was anywhere near this substantial. The one thing I'm a little concerned about, although I like your amendment, your your clause of having the city manager approve the signage is, the sign as posted here in the picture is quite tasteful, and yet in the past, Pack Place had a garish electric blinking sign. So, I mean, signs can be legal and still, well, I guess blinking wasn't legal, but I'd be concerned about the design. And finally, in terms of naming, we have already named a lot of things. Roger McGuire Green got named. Certainly, his memory was entitled to that, but nobody asked me. It used to be City County Plaza, down there. The names shift as the years go by, and Pack was a really big name at the time. Did he put 1.5 million into that building? I don't know, but I think we've got to roll with where we can get money to do the projects we want to do in the city. So I wasn't sure until you actually spoke, Mark. I've decided in favor of this.
Does anyone have any questions of the museum? We've got representatives here, and I just want to make sure we get those nailed down before we
Actually, two
begin with public
questions
comment.
for James.
Okay, yes.
Does the request from the art museum meet the naming rights policy of City Council?
Yes, I mean, staff I looked at the past naming rights, for example, somebody mentioned what did we do in Pack Square Park, and back in 2004, the Pack Square Conservancy was granted the ability to have naming rights for fundraising purposes by City Council. So even though the lease said this is subject to city approval, it didn't specify City Council approval, but we knew that it needed to come to City Council. Also, in March of this year, City Council adopted a naming rights policy that was a general guidelines requiring you to, saying that you would name things for contributors to organizations that contribute to the community or individuals that financially contribute to the community. So it's certainly in line with that. But then that policy also said that City Council has the discretion on a case-by-case basis to grant naming rights with whatever criteria you see fit. So it does meet that standard.
And second, last question is the request from the art museum. Councilwoman Whistler was saying that this is reflected in the lease the art museum signed with the city. Is that correct?
That is correct, and it is a clause, it's a small clause in the lease that's been there for probably going back to 2011 as part of the lease negotiations. It's just not something that we really called out because basically it just says the art museum will be allowed naming rights in this programmable area with city approval. That's short, and then the devil's in the details of how do you bring that forward. So I do understand that may not have been made clear when the general terms of the leases were approved, but it has been the concept in the lease negotiations from the beginning, which is my understanding.
Thanks, James.
Any other questions? Any questions of the art museum at this point, so that we've got all the facts flushed out? No? Okay.
One more comment, Mayor. I'm going to conclude. Note that the lease provides the opportunity for the art museum to offer additional naming rights, opportunities, ideas, proposals. I learned in conversation yesterday that there may be a couple of additional, much smaller implementations of naming rights. They're under negotiation apparently with a couple people. They haven't yet come to the city to ask approval. It's clear that they intend to do that, so that is something that is in the future. But I don't want anybody to take anything that I've said, certainly to say that that there are never going to be any more naming rights in Pack Square Park, or the Plaza, or anywhere else. But if you heard anything tonight, you heard that we need to do this carefully and diligently and responsibly, and I'm pledging to you that that's what I'm about going forward.
Okay, Maggie, can you help us keep track of the time? Let's begin with anyone who's speaking on behalf of this naming rights and see if we need 30 minutes, but we'll give 30 minutes, and then And then we'll do 30 minutes for anyone who wants to speak in opposition to this. Yes. And go ahead and please just state your name first.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council, and city staff, and members of the public. I'm Kim McGuire, and a longtime resident of the city of Asheville and a member of the Asheville Museum Board. We share your concern about the process, and we are very determined as a nonprofit organization to do well by this for the future. We have been hard at work, as you know, for years, and certainly in the most recent months, in deep discussions about what the museum and this cultural center will be for the future. And we have attempted to follow the plans set forth through the lease, and I'll defer to others who are more expert in those details if there are further questions around that. And we're very committed to respecting that this is a public space and should be honored in the right way. At the same time, we have been working very, very hard to raise funds for this project, and as all of us know, that's challenging here in Western North Carolina. And we are very proud that we are very close to $17 million now toward our ultimate goal, including this investment from the State Employees Credit Union. And we really want to express appreciation to them. They are a nonprofit financial cooperative and owned by their members. They're currently numbering over 1.5 million. It's a wonderful program where these members put in $1 a month to give away to cultural and health and other high impact projects. The prior project in Western North Carolina that received a major amount was the Mission Cancer Center. And so we are pleased that these resources are coming to our region going forward. Naming opportunities are an essential part of any capital project, I think, as everyone who's worked with those before knows, and whether they're supporting libraries, universities, parks, recreational facilities, or in this case, a wonderful cultural institution. We are very committed, we understand, and have understood and have expressed to every donor, and will continue to, that all final approval rests with City Council. That is written into any agreement that we have made along the way, and so we stand by that and very much want to support that. So I just want to stand on behalf of the museum and thank the city for its partnership. Great cities have great public-private partnerships. We are here working very hard to bring resources to our community, and this process has not been totally smooth, as many aren't, but we believe that we're going to have a legacy project for the future, and we very much will appreciate your support tonight and pledge to work openly and honestly with you going forward. So thank you.
Anyone else wishing to speak in support of the proposal?
Tracy Gould. Can't really say if I'm pro or con on this one. I just want to throw it out there because I'm a little confused as far as you're talking about y'all's lease. You're going back to the whole selling and naming rights and stuff. But a long-term lease, at least leaves it where the control can always come back to the city. So just remind on the sheriff thing, that's the only other thing I was hanging out for. Sheriff is.
We'll do that in a little bit. Just hang on, we're going to do this one first. Cool. Thanks. Anyone else wishing to speak? Okay, that was a quick 30 minutes. We'll move to con. All right. And I've got people signed up these sheets that we usually use for the public comment at the end, but I'm assuming that since when it says art museum, it's really more for now. So go ahead and let me know if you'd like to speak at this point. Yes, please. Come on.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Leslie Anderson, 10 Blackwood Road. From 1986 to 1985, I was the director of downtown development in the city of Asheville. Let me say I've been given some time by Megan Rogers, Stacey Anderson, and John Mike.
This is 10 minutes. I think I saw all those folks there.
Okay. I'm a student of Asheville history, and I staff the development of Pack Place and the expansion of these cultural and educational amenities on that site. I speak today to convey that the city should not pass this resolution on behalf of the Asheville Art Museum, nor should it change or add any names to this area known as South Pack Square. I will address 4 areas quickly: Asheville history, the public's asset, the practice of naming them, and the city's role in this capital campaign. First, Asheville history. The Central Business District is a National Historic District, so designated in 1979. Pack Square is one of the most richly historical, compact, and valuable plots of real estate from Charlotte north up to the state line, from Morganton to Murphy. This is where previous city councils intentionally planted Asheville in 1797. This is where the Cherokee, the Drovers Road, and the Buncombe Turnpike passed and converged. This is the Pack Square immortalized by Thomas Wolfe. This space is where the wealthy entrepreneur George Willis Pack left his indelible mark. He gave the city the land on College Street for construction of the new courthouse in exchange for the Court Square property. Then he deeded that property to the city of Asheville with the stipulation that an open park was to be maintained for the people of Asheville. This area, including this south side, already has a name, designated by your predecessors in 1903. It is Pack Square. The Asheville Art Museum demonstrated a lack of appreciation for this history, I'm sorry to say, and agreements by the city to preserve and interpret Pack Square's history with the overtaking and removal of the mandated exhibits at Pack Place's entry off the square. Second, the city's public assets. This controversial lease, signed today between the city and the museum, killed the idea of a mixed-use cultural center on that site. I have not had the opportunity to review the lease because we were not provided it until late this afternoon. Since there was not the opportunity for dialogue among stakeholder groups such as the Downtown Commission about the lease, only a handful of people knew it included the public sidewalk and areas beyond the walls of Pack Place, as was noted. This was kept amazingly quiet. A question: is there any kind of prohibition for the city in conveying interest in a public street, sidewalk, or square to private groups? This must be addressed first and ensured to the public, particularly regarding property that was donated with the covenant. An open park is to be maintained for the people of Asheville. This question is essential because the area noted in the lease as programmable area, it is land that has always belonged to the people of Asheville since 1797. It is not a nonprofit's property or a corporation's property or even the city council's property. It is sacred ground that up to this point was held in trust by the municipality for all people. As you know, when a municipality enters into a lease of 10 years or more, it is the same as a sale. If you take this action, you will violate the public's trust by giving away our assets to one nonprofit in Buncombe County that can then sell them for their own purposes and control. Why would you sell these assets and naming rights in the first place? Disregard Mr. Pack and Asheville history. And why would you do this in a way that has at best indirect benefit to the public? How can public property be conveyed for private purposes? How can public property be conveyed for private purposes? This advantage and favoritism given to one nonprofit in Asheville for one organization's capital campaign is a slippery slope. Here's what I mean. I'm a longtime member of the League City of Asheville that owns the building at 29 Billboard. We purchased the building in 1984 in large measure to support the budding downtown revitalization effort. We have capital needs on our building. We need cash. Can we lease the 25 linear feet of sidewalk fronting our building from the city and sell it to a sponsor? Unlike the art museum, we've given thousands of dollars in donations to the city for your projects. The boardroom in Pack Place, the W.C. Reed Center, and the new Dr. Wesley Grant Center. The precedent you set today is a slippery slope. I agree that naming rights are important for capital campaigns. I'm in the nonprofit consulting business. However, after studying your naming rights policy called for in Resolution 1455, I believe you've not followed your own guidelines, including the first one. Priority should be given to names carrying geographical, historical, or cultural significance to the area in which the property is located or to the city as a whole. The name SECU Plaza does not meet this criteria. The third guideline, the property may be named after an individual or organization that has made significant financial or civic contributions to the city, or has made a direct financial grant to the city for purposes of development of particular property. I don't believe this criteria is met. I realize the policy is loosely written and gives council latitude. Let's agree, however, that the naming rights for the Civic Center are not the same as selling public assets and rights of way. The museum's behavior regarding your policy, as I heard just now, also does not follow your own policy. Now, $1.5 million is a lot of money. I acknowledge that. It's 6% of the museum's published goal of $25 million. If it is absolutely essential, and since Mr. Hunt just said that the gift was given for the building, why doesn't the credit union simply put their name on one of the wings of the museum's large building? The bottom line, however, is how could the city ever choose to supersede the incredible legacy of George Rose Pack? And lastly, the role of the city in this capital campaign. I understand the value of cultural and civic amenities in the city. I do. I worked hard for years to make them happen. What I do not understand is the city's unprecedented support for one organization's capital campaign. Why is it the city's role to see that their capital campaign meets its goal? And what is the rush? Instead of going through all these gyrations, I just asked, why didn't the city simply work with Pack Place over the years to maintain the city's property in the first place? And I draw your attention back to George Pack. Not only did he give the land for what was later named as Pack Square and leave the capital campaign fund for most of the cost of the bank's monument, in 1888 he provided salaries for teachers at Asheville's first African-American school. The next year, his financial support provided impetus for the creation of the city's first kindergarten. In 1899, he purchased a bank building to greatly expand the library on the site where the museum entry is today. And I guarantee you that would be, in today's dollars, given all that he did for this city, many, many, many more dollars than $1.5 million. Thank you very much.
I've got another person signed up, Ted Prosser.
I'm going to go last.
Okay, but you run the risk.
That's fine.
Next I have Adrian Vassallo.
Good evening, Council. I'm Adrian Vassallo, and I'm here as a downtown commissioner. I started serving on downtown commission in 2012, the same year that Pam Myers served on downtown commission. And as part of those early months of service on downtown commission, I acquainted myself with the rules of procedure and what our responsibility was to you as city council. And the first task that we are given is to develop and recommend plans and policies for downtown. I took that very seriously. I know many of you think downtown commission is a design review process, and that is part of our charter. but I'm not a design professional. I think the art museum in downtown is great. I think this design is great. But what I'm there is to contribute to the plans and policies for downtown. That same year, this council approved a $2 million contribution into the CIP budget for the art museum. That discussion was never had with downtown commission as far as setting priorities for downtown. I don't know that you see that is, but from my perspective, that's where we provide input to you as city council on what the needs for downtown are. And the needs of infrastructure and service are greater than the needs of the art museum. Fast forward to this year. I won't rehash the naming policy issues. I think Leslie eloquently stated that. But we've never seen a lease, and we never saw the adjoining of the public plaza to this lease agreement. We're reviewing the Haywood Street project as part of the RFP. Why are we being circumvented with this? And then to see this come before you when we heard earlier from the police presentation that this is not going to be a fast process. We need to go through it slowly and make conscientious decisions. We're pushing this through without having open debate about what the needs of an art museum are or what the priorities are for downtown. So I would hope that you would reconsider your vote tonight. It seems clear that you're going to vote for it. But we have started a path of resentment and divisiveness started in 2012 with that contribution to the museum, and it's not going to be cured by this vote tonight. The end result is that there will continue to be resentment and divisiveness around the museum and that place until you as council lead and bring us together as a community. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I have Ken Michael up.
Before I start, there are three people here that have given me their time. One, two, three.
If you've already yielded your,
Okay, here's I have plenty. Don't be surprised that Pam Myers bypassed the city council. That is a personality trait that has kept her in hot water.
Mr. Michael, I would appreciate if you keep your remarks to this issue and not make personal attacks during this hearing.
This lease, the ink's not dry on it. I couldn't get it until 4 o'clock today. The city council put a public notice in the paper. They were supposed to complete this lease August the 14th. The public has not even had an opportunity to look at this lease. The city council should re-advertise the lease. The lease between the city and the art museum is illegal. The council will have taxed the Asheville citizens $6 million instead of $2 million for the art museum, and laid open themselves for a lawsuit that will cost the taxpayers over $5 million, not including damages and legal fees. And if the future represents the past, the city will likely hire an outside counsel, like it did Fred Barber, and pay somewhere between $30,000 and $50,000 for this lease, which was not budgeted. And this doesn't even count the hours spent by the city departments dealing with the actual museum boondoggle. Mayor Manheimer, Vice Mayor Hunt, city manager, have let friendship with Pam Myers get in the way of sound business decisions. They have convinced the rest of the council to vote blindly. These three, particularly Vice Mayor Hunt, were more interested in crushing the Pat Place partnership and ousting the Colburn Mineral Museum than making sound business decisions for which they were elected. Unfortunately, the citizens of Asheville, the major media, the Asheville Citizen Times and WLOS, have contributed to your arrogance by not doing a proper job of investigative reporting. And until the Asheville Citizen Times and WLOS decide to do something about investigating and exposing issues for the public to decide and provide input to its leadership, the city council and city manager will continue to downplay and avoid public being accountable. Manheimer's recent comments about the decision to fly the flag representing gay rights on the city building were exposed as a made-up decision and a made-up process. She apparently assumed there would be no investigative reporting. I was taught that if you always tell the truth, you never have to remember what you said. Unfortunately, she's exhibiting this pattern of behavior too often. The proposed foundation signage is just another example of the Asheville Art Museum boondoggle and the attempt to avoid significant public discussion. Myers, in their October 21st letter to Mayor Manheimer, states, the Asheville Art Museum, with support from area State Employee Credit Union representatives and Dr. Huff, has been working closely with the foundation since 2013. And it's almost the end of 2014 and nobody's ever heard about this. This entire boondoggle is really about Pam Myers, Executive Director. She's the Pied Piper here. Nobody else is. Go on the Art Museum website. You can't find the names of the board. You can't find their addresses. You can't find out when the board meets. And you get welcomed on behalf of the board by Pam Myers. Council is, so to speak, in bed with Myers at the expense of the Asheville taxpayers and many other worthy organizations. Council has spent too many tax dollars and too much time on this matter when the council should have just continued the lease arrangement between the Pack Place Board and the city. There was no expense, there was no headache, no administration, and the city got $10 a year. Council opted to become the landlord and the administrator instead of passing the responsibility to that community board that had done an outstanding job for over 20 years. Another sticking point for me is the council and the manager tried to hide the fact that the city was funding the Art Museum $2 million by eliminating that expense in the 2015 capital budget and entering into a new expense for $2 million called Pack Place Maintenance to be spent in 2017. There was no required formal amendment to the budget by the city council. The Health Adventure went bankrupt. The Art Museum budget provided to the Buncombe County Tourism Development Authority initially had bankrupted the Art Museum due to unrealistic dividend and interest income estimates. However, the Art Museum blatantly adjusted the forecast within just the past 2 months in order to keep getting the $1.5 million grant that they defaulted on numerous times. The chickens may come home to roost on this one. So what provisions are in this lease and or any other document that deal with what happens to the $1.5 million that this foundation puts up and the city's investment when the Art Museum goes bankrupt? Relationships with city council must be like a secret society. Is it a handshake? Is some special sign in order to get money? Myers gets $2 million and all the attention she needs and does whatever she wants to do. Do we need to change the name City Council to City Congress? Well, if it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it's a duck. This City Council's action and inaction on Pack Place, the Art Museum, and lots of other matters is playing right into the hands of Tim Mott, an elected representative that has tried to steal the city's water, and still may be successful, has stolen the airport, and has already proposed changes in the election process for the city. If elected again, he could propose the demise of the city as you have demised Pack Place. You may reap what you've sown. If I and others can't stop you from making this decision, and you're going to approve this request for signage, then return the 2 cents that you put in the 2014 budget for tax increase, and return that to the taxpayer. Thank you.
members of the board. I live in the county, and I think the county commissioners of Buncombe and the county taxpayers have put a lot of money into this over the years. I don't think you can discount that at all. I don't know why they haven't been consulted on this name either. I think one government ought to consult with another government because it could come up with some better ideas. Sometimes it just takes the common sense of some individual, even a child, to lead you in the right way. But when you're strong, hard-headed politicians and think you know better and powerful than anybody else, that could lead you down the wrong road. I think you take the humility way and ask people's input. I've covered the board at the Art Museum for months. They're on YouTube. You can look at them. The most arrogant, the most indecisive people I've ever met, and unknowledgeable of the issues. You can look at the latest one we've done. Nobody knows what the right hand is doing. They're taking whatever the council and the county manager is doing and sending it on through just like it was approved. That bothers me after seeing years and years of work going into something like this, and very smart, intelligent people sitting at the table and can't even get a handle on it. Now a board member elected, or not elected, appointed by city council and appointed by county commissioners and others, why they are not knowledgeable of what he is doing. This issue has not even been brought up at the board even yet about what you're talking about right now. The lease has not even been discussed. Isn't that amazing? At the board level, the Art Museum, at the one that I go to anyway. Now, I would think if you're looking at money, which, you know, the love of money is the root of all evil. But if you're looking at money, I would make you think a little bit. Do you want this one signage to be 1.5 million? Or why not do it another way to make it where you could have more offers over a period of years at different points in time and have a different way of people putting money in, and quit this naming of something, but give a place where you could have a lot of contributors that would make a lot more money than $1.5 million. You need to think out of the box, not what the policy is saying right now, but why not you improve that policy? If you're going to make $1.5 million for this, take that down and let's see what the real picture might be. You might have that one time every 2 or 3 years. You might get that money. Think out of the box. Thank you.
And lastly, I have Mr. Prosser.
Good evening, Mayor, Council, and staff select. My name is Ted Prosser, and exactly 26 years ago on this very date, I started working downtown in the county department. A little office in 5 Wilmer Avenue. So I've seen a lot. I've seen when there was absolutely nothing here. You had very little tax base, very little interest in downtown. I've seen this council swing 180 degrees against it, for it, back for it again, and it's become a wonderful, wonderful place now. Your companies that I own and control, we have developed and managed and leased close to 1 million square feet in this town. Some of it we leased more than once. We also contributed over $100,000 to the park and the buildings and facilities around what is now, I guess, the Art Museum. I'm really happy with what happened to that place. Very weak board allowed mismanagement and it to go out of business. You know, we contributed a lot of money to that, including the land between those 2 courtyards. So we have a vested interest here. I have a vested interest here. And frankly, I think that you have ignored your own boards, your own processes, and your own systems in trying to rename something that has a perfectly good name. You know, I'm not going to try to rehash it. I think what Leslie says is very true, and it pains me that it seems from listening to you speak today, which you've already made up your mind, without even hearing from people who have contributed hundreds of thousands of dollars to this effort and that vision. That vision was very inclusive of what we saw for the city. This vision seems very explicit to me, and that's just how it feels. I'm a big supporter of art and the art museum, and I understand landlord issues. If you don't have somebody, you've got somebody that wants to move in, I'll move. I think this process has been flawed, it's secretive, and not transparent at all. And I think that has created a lot of mistrust with something that's probably a pretty good effort. But even having been the landlord for the art museum, they don't always play well with others. They have good intentions, but they steamroll people and forget that we're all in this community. We all make this community what it is. I encourage you to not approve this. The square, again, has a perfectly good name. Please honor that and the thousands of hours and dollars that other people have granted and donated to the city already. And please consider, don't be closed-minded. There's a lot of people that are not happy with this. Thank you.
Maybe we're in. Okay, we got time for one additional speaker if there's anyone who would like to.
Madam Mayor, City Council, Brother Christopher, I want to thank you for allowing me to speak because it kept me from having to do a point of order. Because, you know, when you said 30 minutes for pro, 30 minutes for comment, and I know that there are more intelligent people here to speak on this behalf, I was going to be willing to keep my mouth shut. When I woke up this morning, I thought I was in Fisherman's Wharf in California. You ever been there? You ever take a deep breath when you wake up? What do you smell? Fish. A lot of fish. A very potent smell of fish. And I was watching a movie where the electric company was doing something wrong and they had a code up that broke some federal law, so they said make sure there's enough opacity with smoke. When I left here earlier to go smoke a cigarette, I need fresh air. There was so much smoke. Just like now. There's such a stench of fish and such a thickness of smoke that I don't know if I can find my way out the door. The lease or whatever it is, printed today. No one given an opportunity to read it. Woo! The fish in here smells. So just get some flown and get on. And I will tell you this, if we are covenant breakers to those of the past, who gave their life to this community, their wealth to this community, what the hell, it's only a couple hundred years, right? So we made a covenant 100 years ago. Who cares? It's not convenient now, is it? I can get $1.5 million. Dude, I'm going to tell you what, you are bad business people, because if you're going to do that, why not just do a lease a year and put the name up for sale every year at $1 million? Because when you look at how much it costs just to get a minute's commercial time, $1.5 million ain't nothing. You got to make it pay the whole bill. For 10-year lease, that's cheap, very cheap. A lot of smoke. Oh, I'm going to have to take a really good, strong bath tonight and pour on before they're going to blow all over me so I can get rid of this fish smell. Because it really stinks. It's like having a guest. You know what they say about guests? After 3 days, they smell like fish. And it sure is fishy. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we have a motion.
I have 2 points of clarification, if I could. The first is that this programmable area is public, it's still city-owned, is public access area, and the specific language in the lease says that any signage or naming rights to this area that's granted, they may not impair public access or use of the city rights of ownership. So just so you know that that has been made clear in the leases, and this is not exclusive art museum area in the plaza. And I also felt the need just to clarify that the leases were approved in July of this year. The terms of those leases, the major terms of those leases have not changed. They were publicly advertised back in July, And this process has taken longer than we hoped for, but this is our usual process for leases. You get the basic terms approved in public hearing, city council, and then you work to craft the lease. But, so I just wanted to clarify those 2 points.
Yeah, I just had a comment to make that this is still South Pack Square. This isn't the whole square that the naming is about. It's a little corner of it. So it's still South Pack Square. PAC is still recognized. And as for using public sidewalks, we rent them out to restaurants all the time. Look at all the sidewalk cafes on city sidewalks. I mean, that's not an unusual thing. And this isn't even being closed off to non-customers. As Attorney just said, it's a public space. So I think the whole argument that somehow we're selling it to private use, that we're renaming the PAC Square, holds no water with me at all.
Yeah. This has been a really awkward process, to say the least. Really appreciate your comments, Gwen and Mark, around making sure that we don't wind up in the same place in the future. And I definitely understand some of the misgivings that have been talked about here tonight about what does the process need to look like? How do we make sure that folks don't feel blindsided when this kind of stuff happens? And I don't have the answer to what needs to happen with that process to make it better. I don't know that right off the top of my head, but it's clear that we got to figure something out that's going to work better in the future. Pack Park remains a public park forever. We're talking about naming rights. Fundraising is good. Getting this art museum renovation across the finish line is something the council is committed to something. I took a walk in Pack Park earlier today, and I was just walking around looking at the carvings in the stone and looking at all the names that were out there and all the work that the Conservancy did towards creating that park. And as I was walking, I noticed some of the names carved into the stone at the Reuter Terrace. And the names were names like ABL Technologies, JP Morgan Chase, Van Winkle Law Firm, NCDOT. That space remains public. Those entities chose to give money towards what they thought was a way to improve Asheville Central Park. State Employees Credit Union is trying to do the same thing here. Moving forward to try to improve this public asset. And so I think that aside from the process piece, I think all the pieces that are actually here are good. But the process needs a lot to be desired. Thanks.
Yeah, I just make one comment in response to that. I could agree more with you and convey my frustration with the way this was brought to us to the art museum manager. I pointed to the surprise factor that we should have known this was coming forward at an earlier time. I suggested that a better model would be something along the lines to your suggestion, Gordon, Mr. Smith, about what might be a better way to approach this. When the Conservancy had a plan to pursue numbers, they came to the council and they provided the council with much deeper criteria. This goes beyond the general criteria that you have in your resolution, which is primarily geared toward buildings themselves. But when the Conservancy went in there and you made reference to those various different donors, they laid out a criteria and they communicated to the council, we are going to be pursuing donors. And we would like to make you comfortable with the kinds of donors we would go, the locations we would be spotting. And so I would suggest to you as well as the art museum that to get to the point where we know and can anticipate and it's not getting it this week and expecting us to have it on next week's agenda, that would be a better process.
Sure, thank you. I concur with the rest of the council that the process really was flawed, in an imperfect process. But if you were listening to all the issues tonight that we heard tonight, one thing I've learned on council is that it's an imperfect world. We try and do the best we can and try and address issues as we go forward here. So my take on this is, I'm not going to be on council for a long time. And during my narrow window of time here, I feel like my job is to look at what's the long-term best interest of our city here. And I think when this art museum is complete, and school children are in there in 5 or 10 years, and they discover the wonderful world of art and all that can open up for them, I think the decision that we make tonight will be the right one, although I agree and I respect many people in the audience tonight that it's a very flawed process. But I think if we're looking at long-term, the right thing is to help the art museum complete this project here, and I think this contribution here will help us get over there, and that's why I place support it tonight.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you. I'm going to turn it over to the Vice Mayor for the last two items.